Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure Mystery Book Club. If you're joining us again after our brief hiatus, I appreciate that, and thank you for coming back to this group. I know that some folks get a big kick out of reading along with us as we pick up a new adventure and mystery book, which is what we're going to be doing today. In fact, as we begin our new title, we need to decide what that title is going to be. And we have had two suggestions. Both of them are winners. One of them is King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard, the first of the Alan Quatermain adventure novels. And the second one is Princess of Mars, the first in the John Carter Warlord of Mars books by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So, to get right on it, I mean, there's really sort of no preamble for this, but I have in here a basket, and I have our two slips of paper, which, as you can see, Princess of Mars. I'm going to take this one, and we're going to fold this up, and that in there. And then we have King Solomon's Mines. We're going to fold this up. Now, here's the deal. I'm shaking this little basket, by the way, and whatever title that I choose, that I pick out of the basket here, will be the one that we start. And so I don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. We'll be one of them, but we'll find out. So let's do this. I'm not even going to look at them. Okay, let's see. All right, it is this one, and this one is King Solomon's Mines. We're going to be reading King Solomon's Mines. All right, very good. Now, I will preface this by saying that there's going to be some interesting words in here. I think H. Rider Haggard, I haven't done the research on this yet, but I believe H. Rider Haggard actually made up a lot of the African village and country names himself. So some of these names do not fall trippingly off the tongue, and so there might be a little bit of a tongue-tiedness for me. I ask your indulgence and your patience, and we'll see about that here. Here is our copy right here. This is it's a very nice illustrated edition of the first three Alan Quatermain titles. And as is always the case, if you do not have a copy of King Solomon's Mines, and not everyone does, you can go to Project Gutenberg and you can type in King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. Just any sort of keywords will bring it up. So that way you can read through that online if you choose to. So you'll have that available. That is available for free. We will be changing the little graphic in the Facebook page and the pictures and all sorts of things. We'll get a link. Usually, if you go to our book club section for the San Diego Public Library website, there is a link there. Every time we change the book, we update the link and we update the author information, and we will be doing that again. Now that we know what our book is and who our author is, we will be changing that as well, and there will be a link to the Project Gutenberg version of King Solomon's Mines. So keep on the lookout for that. We can't do it today, of course, because we're reading. So let's start. H. Rider Haggard, King Solomon's Mines. You can look at this in a couple of different ways. You can look at this as an example of European expansionist literature, where there was a period in history where the adventurer and the explorer was considered to be the superhero of their day, Scott of the Antarctic and discovering new lands. And, this was a big thing. I just read the City of Zed. And again, that same sort of time frame happens late 1800s, early 1900s. The world was a mysterious place, and if you saw a land that was that never been explored, then all of a sudden the Europeans had it in their head to go explore it. And some of these real people did not come back alive, and some did and became very famous for it. And so King Solomon's Mines is actually a part of that whole genre, it's a product of the mindset of the time, which is that uh, the world is a mysterious place. Let's go discover these mysteries. Let's go find out what is lurking. In this case, it'll be in the heart of Africa. And again, the dark continent, as they called it, the center of Africa was deemed to be a place of wonder and a place of mystery and a place where only the strong survived, and you could just as easily die from malaria as you could from a spear getting thrown into your chest. So, it was considered to be this vast and mysterious place, and so where else is the adventurer and hero going to go but Africa? Or the other alternative, besides that, is you can also consider this to be a rollicking adventure novel, and you can sort of see which side I fall on. I fall on the adventure novel side, the part that where it is, in fact, a prime example of the genre, and that it is something that many other what can I say? Many other genres have kind of used King Solomon's Mines and the H. Rider Haggard books as inspiration for what would come later on, Indiana Jones. So, as we begin, we're going to start this. I will tell you just a quick footnote here. There is an introduction in this edition, and I don't like introductions usually because they refer to things throughout the book that haven't happened yet. And so, I kind of feel like the publisher kind of said, oh, by the way, we need an introduction. Please write a quick introduction for this edition. I would much rather just get into the story and discover all these places and all these characters. And then after that, we can go back to the introduction where they actually reference all these places and characters. And that way we don't have to why are you mentioning this person? We don't even know this person. It's just a little silly to me. So anyway, pet peeve. So we're going to begin right now. The first chapter is entitled, I Meet Sir Henry Curtis. It is a curious thing that at my age, I shall never see 60 again, I should find myself taking up a pen to try to write a history. I wonder what sort of a history it will be when I have finished it, if ever I come to the end of the trip. I have done a good many things in my life, which seems a long one to me, owing to my having begun work so young, perhaps. At an age when other boys are at school, and I was earning let's try that again. At an age when other boys are at school, I was earning my living at the old colony in Natal. I have been trading, hunting, fighting, or exploring ever since, and yet it is only 8 months ago that I made my pile. It is a big pile now that I have got it. I don't yet know how big, but I do not think I would go through the last 15 or 16 months again for it. No, not if I knew that I should come out safe at the end, pile and all. But then, I am a timid man, and dislike violence. Moreover, I am almost sick of adventure. I wonder why I am going to write this book. It is not in my line. I am not a literary man, though very devoted to the Old Testament and also to the Ingoldsby legends. Let me try to set down my reasons, just to see if I have any. First reason, because Sir Henry Curtis and Captain John Good asked me. Second reason, because I am laid up here at Durban with the pain in my left leg. Ever since that confounded lion got hold of me, I have been liable to this trouble, and being rather bad just now, it makes me limp more than ever. There must be some poison in a lion's teeth. Otherwise, how is it that when your wounds are healed, they break out again? Generally, mark you, at the same time of the year that you got your mauling. It is a hard thing when one has shot 65 lions or more, as I have in the course of my life, that the 66th should chew your leg like a quid of tobacco. It breaks the routine of the thing, and putting other circumstances aside, I am an orderly man, and don't like that. This is by the way. Third reason, because I want my boy Harry, who is over there at the hospital in London studying to become a doctor, to have something to amuse him and keep him out of mischief for a week or so. Hospital work must sometimes pall and grow rather dull, for even of cutting up dead bodies there may be some satiety. And as this history will not be dull, whatever else it may be, it will put a little life into things for a day or two while Harry is reading of our adventures. Fourth reason and last, because I'm going to tell the strangest story that I remember. It may seem a queer thing to say, especially considering that there is no woman in it, except for Fulada. Stop, though. There is Gagula, if she is a woman and not a fiend. But she was 100 at least, and therefore not marriageable. So I don't count her. At any rate, I can safely say that there is not a petticoat in the whole history. Well, I had better come to the yoke. It is a stiff place, and I feel as though I were bogged up to the axle. But suchies, as the Boers say, I am sure I don't know how they spelt it, softly does it. A strong team will come through at last, that is, if they are not too poor. You can never do anything with poor oxen. Now, to make a start. I, Alan Quartermain of Durban, Natal, gentlemen, make oath and say that's how I headed my deposition before the magistrate about poor Kiva's and Ventvogel's sad deaths. But somehow it doesn't seem quite the right way to begin a book. And besides, am I a gentleman? What is a gentleman? I don't quite know, and yet I have had to do with... Well, no, I will scratch that out, for this word I do not like. I've known natives who are, and you will say, Harry, my boy, for you have done with this tale, and I have known mean whites and with lots of money and fresh out from home too, who are not. At any rate, I was born a gentleman, though I have nothing but a poor traveler, trader, and hunter all my life. Whether I have remained so, I know not. But you must judge of that. Heaven knows I've tried. I have killed many men in my time, yet I have never slain wantonly, or stained my hand in innocent blood, but only in self-defense. The Almighty gave us lives, and I suppose He meant us to defend them. At least I have always acted on that, and I hope it will not be brought up against me when my clock strikes. There. It is a cruel and wicked world, and for a timid man I have been mixed up in a deal of fighting. I cannot tell the rights of it, but at any rate I have never stolen, though once I cheated a Kafir out of a herd of cattle. But then he had done me a dirty turn, and it has troubled me ever since into the bargain. Well, it is 18 months or so ago since I first met Sir Henry Curtis and Captain Good. It was in this way. I had been up elephant hunting beyond Bangamwatu and had met with bad luck. Everything went wrong that trip. And to top up with, I got the fever badly. As soon as I was well enough, I trekked down to the diamond fields, sold such ivory as I had, together with my wagon and oxen, discharged my hunters, and took the post cart to the Cape. After spending a week in Cape Town, finding that they overcharged me at the hotel, and having seen everything that there was to see, including the botanical gardens, which seemed to me likely to confer a great benefit on the country, and the new Houses of Parliament, which I expect will do nothing of the sort, I determined to go back to Natal by Dunkeld. Then, lying at the docks waiting for the Edinburgh Castle due in from England, I took my berth and went aboard, and that afternoon the Natal passengers from Edinburgh Castle transshipped, and we weighed and put out to sea. Among these passengers who came on board were two who excited my curiosity. One gentleman of about 30 was perhaps the biggest-chested and longest-armed man I ever saw. He had yellow hair, a thick yellow beard, clear-cut features, and large gray eyes set deep in his head. I never saw a finer-looking man, and somehow he reminded me of an ancient Dane. Not that I know of much of ancient Danes, though I know a modern Dane who did me out of 10 pounds. But I remember once seeing a picture of some of these gentry who, I take it, were a kind of white Zulus. They were drinking out of big horns, and their long hair hung down their backs. As I looked at my friend standing there by the companion ladder, I thought that if he only let his grow a little, put one of those chain shirts on to his great shoulders, and took hold of a battle-axe and a horn mug, he might have sat as a model for that picture. By the way, it is a curious thing, and just shows how the blood will out. I discovered afterwards that Sir Henry Curtis, for that was the big man's name, is of Danish blood. There is a footnote here at this point that says, Mr. Quartermain's ideas about ancient Danes seem to be rather confused. We have always understood that they were dark-haired people. Probably he was thinking of Saxons. To continue. Also, he reminded me strongly of somebody else, but at the time I could not remember who it was. The other man who stood talking to Sir Henry was stout and dark, of quite a different cut. I suspected at once that he was a naval officer. I don't know why, but it is difficult to mistake a Navy man. I have gone on shooting trips with several of them in the course of my life, and they have almost proved themselves the best and bravest and nicest fellows I ever met, though sadly given some of them to the use of profane language. I asked a page or two back, what is a gentleman? I'll answer that question now. A Royal Naval Officer is, in a general sort of way, though, of course, there may be a black sheep amongst them here and there. I fancy it is just the wide seas and the breath of God's winds that wash their hearts and blow the bitterness out of their minds and make them what men ought to be. Well, to return, I proved right again. I ascertained that the dark man was a naval officer, a lieutenant of 31, who, after 17 years' service, had been turned out of Her Majesty's employ with the barren honor of a commander's rank, because it was impossible that he should be promoted. This is what people who serve the Queen have to expect, to be shot out into the cold world to find a living just when they are beginning to really to understand their work and to reach the prime of life. I suppose they don't mind it, but for my own part, I had rather earn my bread as a hunter. One's halfpence are as scarce, perhaps, but you do not get so many kicks. The officer's name, I found out by referring to the passengers list, was Good. Captain John Good. He was broad, of medium height, dark, stout, and rather a curious man to look at. He was so very neat and so very clean-shaved, and he always wore an eyeglass in his right eye. It seemed to grow there, for it had no string, but he never took it out except to wipe it. At first I thought he used to sleep in it, but afterwards I found that this was a mistake. He put it in his trousers pocket when he went to bed, together with his false teeth, of which he had 2 beautiful sets that, my own being none of the best, have often caused me to break the 10th commandment. But I am anticipating. Soon after we had got under way, evening closed in, and brought with it very dirty weather. A keen breeze sprung up off land, and a kind of aggravated Scotch mist soon drove everybody from the deck. As for the Dunkeld, she is a flat-bottomed punt, and going up light as she was, she rolled very heavily. It almost seemed as though she would go right over, but she never did. It was quite impossible to walk about, so I stood near the engines, where it was warm, and amused myself with watching the pendulum, which was fixed opposite me, swinging backwards and forwards as the vessel rolled, and marking the angle she touched at each lurch. "That pendulum's wrong. It is not properly weighted," suddenly said a somewhat testy voice at my shoulder. Looking round, I saw the naval officer, whom I noticed when the passengers came aboard. "Indeed. Now, what makes you think so?" I asked. "Think so? I don't think at all. Why, there," as she righted herself after a roll, "if the ship had really rolled to that degree that thing pointed to, then she would never have rolled again, that's all. But it is just like these merchant skippers. They always are so confoundedly careless." Just then the dinner bell rang, and I was not sorry, for it is a dreadful thing to have to listen to an officer of the Royal Navy when he gets on to that subject. I only know one worse thing, and it is to hear a merchant skipper express his candid opinion of officers of the Royal Navy. Captain Good and I went down to dinner together, and there we found Sir Henry Curtis already seated. He and Captain Good were placed together, and I sat opposite to them. The captain and I soon fell into talk about shooting and what not. He asked me many questions, for he is very inquisitive about all sorts of things, and I answering them as well as I could. Presently he got on to elephants. "Ah, sir," called out somebody who was sitting near me, "you've reached the right man for that. Hunter Quatermain should be able to tell you all about elephants if anybody can." Sir Henry, who had been sitting quite quiet, listening to our talk, started visibly. "Excuse me, sir," he said, leaning forward across the table and speaking in a low, deep voice. A very suitable voice it seemed to me to come out of those great lungs. "Excuse me, sir, but is your name Alan Quatermain?" I said that it was. The big man made no further remark, but I heard him mutter, "Fortunate," into his beard. Presently dinner came to an end, and as we were leaving the saloon, Sir Henry strolled up and asked me if I would come into his cabin to smoke a pipe. I accepted, and he led the way to the Dunkeld deck cabin, and a very good cabin it is. It had been 2 cabins, but when Sir Garnet Wolseley, or one of those big swells, went down the coast in the Dunkeld, they knocked away the partition and have never put it up again. There was a sofa in the cabin and a little table in front of it. Sir Henry set the steward for a bottle of whiskey, and the 3 of us sat down and lit our pipes. "Mr. Quatermain," said Sir Henry Curtis, when the man had brought the whiskey and lit the lamp, "the year before last, about this time, you were, I believe, at a place called Bang, Bamangwatu, to the north of Transvaal. I was, I answered, rather surprised that this gentleman should be so well acquainted with my movements, which were not, so far as I was aware, considered of general interest. You were trading there, were you not? Put in Captain Good in his quick way. I was. I looked up a wagon load of goods, made a camp outside of the settlement, and stopped till I had sold them. Sir Henry was sitting opposite to me in a Madeira chair, his arms leaning on the table. He now looked up, fixing his large gray eyes full upon my face. There was a curious anxiety in them, I thought. Did you happen to meet a man called Neville there? Oh, yes. He outspanned alongside of me for a fortnight to rest his oxen before going on to the interior. I had a letter from a lawyer a few months back, asking me if I knew what had become of him, which I answered to the best of my ability at the time. Yes, said Sir Henry, your letter was forwarded to me. You said in it that the gentleman called Neville left Bamangwatu at the beginning of May in a wagon with a driver, a voorlooper, and a Kaffir hunter called Jim, announcing his intention of trekking, if possible, as far as Inyati, the extreme trading post in the Matabele country, where he would sell his wagon and proceed on foot. You also said that he did sell his wagon. For 6 months afterwards, you saw the wagon in the possession of a Portuguese trader, who told you that he had bought it at Inyati from a white man whose name he had forgotten, and that he believed the white man and the native servant had started off for the interior on a shooting trip. Yes. Then came a pause. Mr. Quatermain, said Sir Henry suddenly, I suppose you know or can guess nothing more of the reasons of Mr. Neville's journey to the northward, or as to what point that journey was directed. I heard something, I answered, and stopped. The subject was one which I did not care to discuss. Sir Henry and Captain Good looked at each other, and Captain Good nodded. Mr. Quatermain, went the former, I'm going to tell you a story and ask your advice and perhaps your assistance. The agent who forwarded me your letter told me that I might rely upon it implicitly, as you were, he said, well known and universally respected in Natal, and especially noted for your discretion. I bowed and drank some whiskey and water to hide my confusion, for I am a modest man, and Sir Henry went on. Mr. Neville was my brother. Oh, I said, starting, for now I knew of whom Sir Henry had reminded me when I first saw him. His brother was a much smaller man and had a dark beard, but now that I thought of it, he possessed eyes of the same shade of gray, and with the same keen look in them. Features too were not unlike. He was, went on Sir Henry, my only and younger brother. Until 5 years ago, I do not suppose that we were ever a month away from each other. But just about 5 years ago, a misfortune befell us, as sometimes does happen in families. We quarreled bitterly, and I behaved unjustly to my brother in my anger. Here Captain Good nodded his head vigorously to himself. The ship gave a big roll just then, so that the looking-glass, which was fixed opposite us to starboard, was for a moment nearly over our heads, and as I was sitting with my hands in my pockets and staring upwards, I could see him nodding like anything. As I dare say you know, went on Sir Henry, if a man dies intestate and has no property but land, real property it is called in England, it all descends to his eldest son. It so happens that just at the time when we quarreled, our father died intestate. He had put off making his will until it was too late. The result was that my brother, who had not been brought up to any profession, was left without a penny. Of course, it would have been my duty to provide for him, but at the time, the quarrel between us was so bitter that I did not, to my shame, I say it, and he sighed deeply, offer to do anything. It was not that I grudged him justice, but I waited for him to make advances, and he made none. I am sorry to trouble you with this, Mr. Quartermain, but I must, to make things clear, a good, quite so, said the captain. Mr. Quartermain will, I am sure, keep this history to himself. Of course, said I, for I rather pride myself on my discretion, for which, as Sir Henry has heard, I have some repute. Well, went on Sir Henry, my brother had a few £100 to his account at the time. Without saying anything to me, he drew out this paltry sum, and, having adopted the name of Neville, started off for South Africa in the wild hope of making a fortune. This I learned afterwards, some 3 years past, and I had heard nothing from my brother, though I wrote several times. Doubtless the letters never reached him, but as time went on, I grew more and more troubled about him. I found out, Mr. Quartermain, that blood is thicker than water. Well, that's true, said I, thinking of my boy, Harry. I found out, Mr. Quartermain, that I would have given half my fortune to know that my brother George, the only relation I possess, was safe and well, and that I should see him again. But you never did, Curtis, jerked out Captain Good, glancing at the big man's face. Well, Mr. Quartermain, as time went on, I became more and more anxious to find out if my brother was alive or dead, and if alive, to get him home again. I set inquiries on foot, and your letter was one of the results. As far as it went, it was satisfactory, for it showed that till lately George was alive, but it did not go far enough. So, to cut a long story short, I made up my mind to come out and look for him myself, and Captain Good was so kind as to come with me. Yes, said the captain, nothing else to do, you see. Turned out by my lords of the Admiralty to starve on half pay. And now, perhaps, sir, you will tell us what you know of the gentleman called Neville. Okay, that was the first chapter. Hold on just a second here. Chapter 2, entitled The Legend of Solomon's Mines. What was it that you heard about my brother's journey at Bamangwatu? Asked Sir Henry, as I paused to fill my pipe before replying to Captain Good. I heard this, I answered, and I have never mentioned it to a soul until today. I heard that he was starting for Solomon's Mines. Solomon's Mines, ejaculated both my hearers at once. Where are they? I don't know, I said. I know where they are said to be. Once I saw the peaks of the mountains that border them, and there were 130 miles of desert between me and them, and I am not aware that any white man ever got across it save one. But perhaps the best thing I can do is to tell you the legend of Solomon's Mines as I know it. You passing your word not to reveal anything I tell you without my permission. Do you agree to that? I have my reasons for asking. Sir Henry nodded, and Captain Good replied, Certainly, certainly. Well, I began, as you may guess, generally speaking, elephant hunters are a rough set of men, who do not trouble themselves with much beyond the facts of life and the ways of the Kaffirs. But here and there you meet a man who takes the trouble to collect traditions from the natives and tries to make out a little piece of history of this dark land. It was such a one as this who first told me of the legend of Solomon's Mines. Now, a matter of nearly 30 years ago, that was when I was on my first elephant hunt in the Matabele country. His name was Evans, and he was killed the following year, poor fellow, by a wounded buffalo, and lies buried near the Zambezi Falls. I was telling Evans one night, I remember, of some wonderful workings I had found whilst hunting kudu and eland in what is now the Leidenburg district of the Transvaal. I see they have come across these workings again lately in prospecting for gold, and I knew of them years ago. There is a great wide wagon road cut out of the solid rock and leading to the mouth of the working, or gallery. Inside the mouth of this gallery are stacks of gold quartz piled up ready for roasting, which shows that the workers, whoever they were, must have left in a hurry. Also, about 20 paces in, the gallery is built across, and a beautiful bit of masonry it is. "Aye," said Evans, "but I will spin you a queerer yarn than that." And he went on to tell me how he had found in the far interior a ruined city, which he believed to be the Ophir of the Bible, and, by the way, other more learned men have said the same long since poor Evans' time. I was, I remember, listening open-eared to all these wonders, for I was young at the time, and this story of an ancient civilization and of the treasures which those old Phoenician adventurers used to extract from a country long since lapsed into the darkness of barbarism took a great hold upon my imagination, when suddenly he said to me, "Lad, did you ever hear of the Suliman Mountains up the northwest of the Mashuk-Ulumbwe country?" I told him I never had. "Ah, well," he said, "that is where Solomon really had his mines, his diamond mines, I mean." "How do you know that?" I asked. "Know it? Huh. Why, what is Suleiman but a corruption of Solomon?" And there's a footnote here that says Suleiman is the archaic form of Solomon. To continue, besides an old Isanusi or witch doctress up in the Manica country told me all about it. She said that the people who lived across these mountains were a branch of the Zulus, speaking a dialect of Zulu, but finer and bigger men even. And there lived among them great wizards who had learnt their art from white men when all the world was dark, and who had the secret of a wonderful mine of bright stones. Well, I laughed at this story at the time, though it interested me, for the diamond fields were not discovered then, but poor Evans went off and was killed, and for 20 years I never thought any more of the matter. However, just 20 years afterwards, and that is a long time, gentlemen, an elephant hunter does not often live for 20 years at this business, I heard something more definite about Suleiman's Mountains and the country which lies beyond them. I was up beyond the Manica country and at a place called Sitenda's Kraal, and a miserable place it was, for a man could get nothing to eat and there was but little game about. I had an attack of fever, and was in a bad way, generally, when one day a Portuguese arrived with a single companion, a half-breed. Now, I know your low-class Delagoa Portuguese well. There is no greater devil unhung in a general way, battening as he does upon human agony and flesh in the shape of slaves. But this was quite a different type of man to the mean fellows whom I had been accustomed to meet. Indeed, in appearance he had reminded me more of the polite dames I have read about, for he was tall and thin, with large dark eyes, curling gray mustache. We talked together a little, for he could speak broken English, and I understood a little Portuguese. And he told me that his name was Jose Silvestri, and that he had a place near Delagoa Bay. When we went on the next day with his half-breed companion, he said goodbye, taking off his hat quite in the old style. "Goodbye, Signor," he said. "If we ever meet again, I shall be the richest man in the world, and I will remember you." I laughed a little. I was too weak to laugh much, and watched him strike out for the great desert to the west, wondering if he were mad, or what he thought he was going to find there. A week passed, and I got the better of my fever. One evening I was sitting on the ground in front of a little tent I had with me, chewing the last leg of a miserable fowl I had brought from a native for a bit of cloth worth 20 fowl, and staring at the hot red sun sinking down over the desert, when suddenly I saw a figure, apparently that of a European, for it wore a coat, on the slope of the rising ground opposite me about 300 yards away. The figure crept along on its hands and knees. Then it got up and staggered forward a few yards on its legs, only to fall and crawl again. Seeing that it must be somebody in distress, I sent one of my hunters to help him, and presently he arrived, and who do you suppose it turned out to be? "Jose Silvestri, of course," said Captain Good. "Yes, Jose Silvestri, or rather his skeleton and a little skin. His face was bright yellow with bilious fever. His large dark eyes stood nearly out of his head, for all the flesh had gone. There was nothing but yellow parchment-like skin, white hair, and the gaunt bones sticking up beneath. "Water! For the sake of Christ, water!" he moaned, as I saw that his lips were cracked, and his tongue, which protruded between them, was swollen and blackish. I gave him water with a little milk in it, and he drank it in great gulps, 2 quarts or so, without stopping. I would not let him have any more. Then the fever took him again, and he fell down and began to rave about Suleiman's mountains and the diamonds in the desert. I carried him into the tent and did what I could for him, which was little enough, but I saw how it must end. About 11 o'clock he grew quieter, and I lay down for a little rest and went to sleep. At dawn I woke again, and in the half-light saw Silvestri sitting up, a strange, gaunt form, and gazing out towards the desert. Presently the first ray of sun shot right across the wide plain before us till it reached the faraway crest of one of the tallest of the Suleiman Mountains, more than 100 miles away. "There it is!" cried the dying man in Portuguese, and pointing with his long, thin arm. "But I shall never reach it, never. No one will ever reach it." Suddenly he paused and seemed to take a resolution. "Friend," I'll try this again. "Friend," he said, turning towards me, "are you there? My eyes grow dark." "Yes," I said, "yes, lie down now and rest." "Aye," he answered, "I shall rest soon. I have time to rest, all eternity. Listen, I am dying. You have been good to me. I will give you the writing. Perhaps you will get there if you can live to pass the desert, which has killed my poor servant and me." Then he groped in his shirt and brought out what I thought was a Boer tobacco pouch made of the skin of the Swart Vet pens or stable antelope. It was fastened with a little strip of hide, what we call rimpy, and this he tried to loose, but he could not. He handed it to me. "Untie it," he said. I did so, and extracted a bit of torn yellow linen, on which something was written in rusty letters. Inside this rag was a paper. Then he went on feebly, for he was growing weak. "The paper has all that is on the linen. It took me years to read. Listen, my ancestor, a political refugee from Lisbon, and one of the first Portuguese who landed on these shores, wrote that when he was dying on those mountains, which no white foot ever pressed before or since, his name was José de Silvestre, and he lived 300 years ago. His slave who waited for him on this side of the mountains found him dead, and brought the writing home to Delagua. It has been in the family ever since, but none have cared to read it, till at last I did, and I have lost my life over it. But another may succeed, and become the richest man in the world. The richest man in the world. Only give it to no one, Signor. Go yourself." Then he began to wander again, and in an hour it was all over. God rest him, he died very quietly, and I buried him deep with big boulders on his breast, so I did not think the jackals can have dug him up. Then I came away. "Aye, but the document," said Sir Henry in a tone of deep interest. "Yes, the document, what was in it?" added the captain. "Well, gentlemen, if you like, I will tell you. I have never showed it to anybody, yet except to a drunken old Portuguese trader, who translated it for me and had forgotten all about it by the next morning. The original rag is at my home in Durban, together with poor Dom José's translation, but I have the English rendering in my pocketbook, and a facsimile of the map, if it can be called a map. Here it is. And just for the sake of it, there is the map. I, José de Silvestre, who am now dying of hunger in the little cave where no snow is, on the north side of the nipple of the southernmost of the two mountains I have named Sheba's Breasts, write this in the year 1590, with a cleft bone upon a remnant of my raiment, my blood being the ink. If my slave should find it when he comes, and should bring it to Delagua, let my friend, name illegible, bring the matter to the knowledge of the king, that he may send an army, which, if they live through the desert and the mountains, and can overcome brave Cucuanas and their devilish arts, to which end many priests should be brought, will make him the richest king since Solomon. With my own eyes I have seen the countless diamonds stored in Solomon's treasure chamber behind the White Death. But through the treachery of Gagul, the witch-finder, I might bring naught away, scarcely my life. Let him who comes follow the map, and climb the snow of Sheba's left breast, till he reaches the nipple, on the north side of which is the great road Solomon made, from whence 3 days' journey to the king's palace. Let him kill Gagul. Pray for my soul. Farewell. José de Silvestre. Then, when I had finished reading the above and shown the copy of the map, drawn by the dying hand of the old Dom with his blood for ink, there followed a silence of astonishment. "Well," said Captain Good, I have been round the world twice and put in at most ports, but may I be hung for a mutineer if ever I heard a yarn like this out of a storybook, or in it either, for the matter of that. It's a queer tale, Mr. Quatermain, said Sir Henry. I suppose you are not hoaxing us. It is, I know, sometimes thought allowable to take in a greenhorn. If you think that, Sir Henry, I said, much put out, and pocketing my paper, for I do not like to be thought one of those silly fellows who consider it witty to tell lies, and who are forever boasting to newcomers of extraordinary hunting adventures which never happened. If you think that, why, there is an end to the matter. And I rose to go. Sir Henry laid his large hand on my shoulder. Sit down, Mr. Quatermain, he said. I beg your pardon. I see very well you do not wish to deceive us, but the story sounded so strange that I could hardly believe it. You shall see the original map in writing when we reach Durban, I answered, somewhat mollified, for really, when I came to consider the question, it was scarcely wonderful that he should doubt my good faith. But, I went on, I have not told you about your brother. I knew the man, Jim, who was with him. He was a Bechuana by birth, and a good hunter, and for a native, a very clever man. That morning on which Mr. Neville was starting, I saw Jim standing by my wagon and cutting up tobacco on the disselboom. Jim, said I, where are you off to this trip? Is it elephants? No, boss, he answered. We are after something worth much more than ivory. And what might that be? I said, for I was curious. Is it gold? No, boss. Something worth more than gold. And he grinned. I asked no more questions, for I did not like to lower my dignity by seeming inquisitive. But I was puzzled. Presently, Jim finished cutting his tobacco. Boss, he said. I took no notice. Boss, he said again. Eh, what is it? I asked. Boss, we are going after diamonds. Diamonds? Why, then you are steering in the wrong direction. You should head for the fields. Boss, have you ever heard of Suleiman's Berg? That is, Solomon's Mountains, Sir Henry. Aye? Have you ever heard of the diamonds there? I have heard a foolish story, Jim. It's no story, boss. Once I knew a woman who came from there and reached Natal with her child. She told me. She's dead now. Your master will feed the Asvogels, that is, vultures. Jim, if he tries to reach Suleiman's country, and so will you if they can get any pickings off your worthless old carcass, said I. He grinned. Mayhap, boss. Man must die. I'd rather like to try a new country myself. The elephants are getting worked out about here. Ah, my boy, I said, you wait until the pale old man gets a grip of your yellow throat, and then we shall hear what sort of tune you sing. Half an hour after that, I saw Neville's wagon move off. Presently, Jim came back running. Goodbye, boss, he said. I don't like to start without bidding you goodbye, for I dare say you are right, and that we shall never trek south again. Is your master really going to Suleiman's Berg, Jim, or are you lying? No, he answered, he is going. He told me he was bound to make his fortune somehow, or try to, so he might as well have a fling for the diamonds. Oh, I said, wait a bit, Jim. Will you take a note to your master, Jim, and promise not to give it to him until you reach Inyati, which was some 100 miles off? Yes, boss. So I took a scrap of paper and wrote on it, let him who comes climb the snow of Sheba's left breast until he reaches the nipple on the north side of which is Solomon's Great Road. Now, Jim, I said, when you give this to your master, tell him that he had better follow the advice on it implicitly. You are not to give it to him now, because I don't want him back asking me questions which I won't answer. Now be off, you idle fellow. The wagon is nearly out of sight. Jim took the note and went. That is all I know about your brother, Sir Henry, but I am much afraid. Mr. Quatermain, said Sir Henry, I'm going to look for my brother. I'm going to trace him to Suleiman's mountains, and over them, if necessary, till I find him, or until I know that he is dead. Will you come with me? I am, as I think I have said, a cautious man, indeed a timid one, and this suggestion frightened me. It seemed to me that to undertake such a journey would be to go to certain death, and, putting other considerations aside, as I had a son to support, I could not afford to die just then. No, thank you, Sir Henry, I think I had rather not, I answered. I am too old for wild-goose chases of that sort, and we should only end up like my poor friend Silvestri. I have a son dependent on me, so I cannot afford to risk my life foolishly. Both Sir Henry and Captain Good looked very disappointed. Mr. Quatermain, said the former, I am well off, and I am bent upon this business. You may put the remuneration for your services at whatever figure you like in reason, and it shall be paid over to you before we start. Moreover, I will arrange, in the event of anything untoward happening to us or to you, that your son shall be suitably provided for. You will see from this offer how necessary I think your presence. Also, if by chance we should reach this place and find diamonds, they shall belong to you and Good equally. I do not want them. But of course, that promise is worth nothing at all, though the same thing would apply to any ivory we may get. You may pretty well make your own terms with me, Mr. Quatermain, and, of course, I shall pay all expenses. Sir Henry, said I, this is about the most liberal proposal I ever had, one not to be sneezed at by a poor hunter and trader, but the job is the biggest I have come across, and I must take time to think it over. I will give you my answer before we get to Durban. Very good, answered Sir Henry. Then I said good night, and turned in and dreamt about poor, long-dead Silvestri and the diamonds. And that is the end of Chapter 2, and we will end it there. Looks like, based on the length of the chapters, we'll probably go about 2 chapters a day. It's not a long book, but there, you see, we're already getting into the thick of the action. So, thank you very much for joining me. Please come back at 4 o'clock on Wednesday in 2 days, and we will read the next 2 chapters of King Solomon's Mines, our new live reading book for the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll see you again next time. Bye, everyone.